Just curious. What device are you watching on? Phone, TV, laptop? Comment below.
You're just too much to be around sometimes. That was the exact line, tucked in the middle of a message that was polite enough to make me feel crazy for being offended, but cutting enough to take the air out of my lungs. It wasn't even from my sister directly. No, it came through a group text, where my parents wrote that, unfortunately, this year, Lisa needed a more low-key Christmas, and they were going to honor her request to keep it simple, which apparently meant keeping me the hell away. My name wasn't even mentioned. Just an awkward, sugar-coated excuse that left no room for misunderstanding. I was uninvited by my own family for Christmas because my sister said I was too much. You want to talk about betrayal? Let's talk about what too much really looks like. Too much is giving up 2 weekends a month for the last 4 years to drive an hour each way and watch someone else's 3 kids while she reconnected with herself at yoga retreats or wine nights that somehow always ended with her passing out in someone else's bathtub. Too much is transferring $500 into her checking account with a heart emoji and a don't worry about it when their water got shut off because she forgot to pay the bill. Too much is spending your own hard-earned vacation days, ones you don't even use for yourself, to help someone else pack, move, unpack, and settle into a new house because their husband took a job he wasn't qualified for in a state they couldn't afford to live in. But I did all of it, without hesitation, without ever sending an invoice or even asking for a thank you, because that's what family does, right? That's what the responsible one does. The emotionally stable one, the one with no kids and no ex-husband and no financial mess dragging behind her like a 30-foot wedding dress on fire. So when I read that message on a Thursday morning at work, coffee halfway to my mouth, inbox already screaming with deadlines, I didn't scream or cry. I just sat there, staring. I even reread it 4 times, each time hoping I had misinterpreted it, hoping maybe they were just trying to simplify things because of space or stress or something that made sense. But the words didn't change, and I couldn't pretend they meant anything else. The truth is, I don't think my parents even realized how much that message said, or maybe they did, and that's what stung more. They had chosen comfort, simplicity, quiet over conflict. And to them, I was conflict. I didn't answer the text. I didn't start a family group chat meltdown or demand an explanation. Instead, I put my phone down, finished my coffee, and quietly began making a list. Not a Christmas list. A list of every single thing I was doing for Lisa, every financial thread, every favor, every unpaid debt. I wanted to know exactly how much I really was. By the time I got home that night, the list was over 20 items long. I had recurring payments linked to her kids' school lunch accounts. I was the emergency contact for 2 of her kids. I was the name on the backup credit card they used when theirs maxed out. There were so many strings I had attached to her life that cutting them felt like a full-time job. And yet, as I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and my laptop open, staring at those numbers and emails and names, something in me felt a strange kind of calm. Like I had finally located the leak in a sinking ship I'd been bailing out for years, without ever noticing how waterlogged I'd become. Do you know what the worst part of giving everything to someone is? It's not the time, or the money, or even the emotional exhaustion. It's realizing that when they're done with you, when they no longer need what you're giving, they'll turn around and decide you were the problem all along. So I didn't yell. I didn't guilt trip her. I didn't send a 3-page message telling her how much she'd hurt me. No. What I did was simple. I started shutting things off. One by one, I turned off the automatic bill pay. I canceled the backup babysitter appointments I had lined up for her date nights in January. I even removed myself from the emergency contact list with the school, emailing the principal directly with a very polite note. She wanted space. She got it. And as I sat there feeling the smallest flicker of power I hadn't felt in years, I realized something else. This wasn't the first time Lisa had crossed a line with me. It was just the first time I finally decided not to cross back over with an apology and a casserole. But here's what I keep coming back to, and maybe you've been there too. When someone tells you you're too much, What are they really saying? Are you actually overwhelming? Or are you just not as easy to use anymore? Because I think people like Lisa don't want quiet. They want compliant. And when you stop being the yes person, when you stop bending yourself into pieces so everyone else can be whole, that's when suddenly you're too loud, too emotional, too dramatic, too much. So fine, this Christmas they could have their quiet dinner without me. No drama, no conflict, no too much. But they had no idea how much they'd miss me when I disappeared. And I had no idea how fast everything would start falling apart once I did. The first thing I turned off was the family phone plan, a shared account I'd been managing and paying for since Lisa's husband, Kevin, lost his job at that used car dealership he worked at for 3 years, but never really understood, where he somehow thought showing up late and complaining about his boss on Facebook wouldn't come back to bite him. It had started innocently enough. Her phone had broken, she couldn't afford a new one, and I had a good plan, so I added her line temporarily, just to help out for a few months. That was 5 years ago, and I had forgotten it was even on my bill until I sat down that night, scouring my statements for things to cancel. I remember hovering over the remove line button for a moment, my finger uncertain, not because I was reconsidering, but because some dusty part of me still wondered if it was too petty, too cold, too final. Then I remembered that text, the one that said I was too much, and I clicked without hesitation. There was no explosion, no midnight text begging me to turn it back on. In fact, for a few days, there was total silence, which felt ironic considering the entire foundation of our falling out was supposedly built on the fact that I talked too much, cared too hard, inserted myself too often. I didn't expect gratitude, but I thought maybe someone would notice the vacuum where my constant presence used to be, the messages I always sent to remind her about the kids' dentist appointments, the Venmo payments I always timed with precision the night before her rent was due, the check-ins after parent-teacher conferences, where she'd pretend everything was fine, even when the teacher's notes were clearly screaming for help. But no one said a word. By the end of the first week, I had pulled out of everything quietly, methodically, like a surgeon extracting shrapnel, carefully but with purpose. The rides I used to give her daughter Emma to her ballet class every Thursday after school were reassigned, or rather left to be figured out by someone else, and judging by the passive-aggressive Facebook post Lisa made on Friday, sometimes people forget who was really there for them. Guess it's your turn to learn the hard way. The backup plan hadn't materialized. I didn't respond, didn't like or comment, didn't even text a friend to vent. Instead, I read the post once, smiled just barely, and went back to sipping the coffee I had made for myself, in silence, in peace, for once not rushing out the door with a to-go cup because someone else needed me more than I needed rest. That weekend, Christmas Eve came with its usual tension, the kind that sits in your chest like heartburn when your phone buzzes every few hours with photos from people who assume you're spending the holiday exactly the way they are. Warm, cozy, surrounded by family and laughter and the smell of cinnamon. I ignored most of them. I made lasagna instead of turkey. I lit a candle that smelled like pine but came from a clearance bin at Target. And I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I wasn't surprised anymore. I had always suspected that the reason Lisa needed me so much was never really about love. It was about utility. I was the safety net, the one who had her act together, the one who could always be counted on to smooth over the rough edges of her life, so no one else had to see the truth. And now that I had stepped back, that truth was starting to show in small, sharp ways. At 10 a.m. on Christmas morning, my phone buzzed with a call from Kevin's number. Not Lisa's, not my parents', Kevin's. A red flag if there ever was one. I didn't answer. Let it ring until it stopped. No voicemail. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again, same number. I turned the phone over, face down on the table, and walked into the kitchen. There's something incredibly liberating about being unreachable, about knowing that the people who once depended on you like a crutch are now discovering how it feels to stand without you. It's not cruel. It's not revenge. It's reality catching up. For years, I had trained Lisa, unknowingly, stupidly, to lean on me instead of standing on her own. I had taught her that no matter how badly she managed her life, someone would always step in and catch her. And when I stopped, she fell. Later that night, I checked my phone. One missed call, no voicemail, no text, just silence. But I knew that wouldn't last. I knew the unraveling had begun. And something in my gut told me that this was only the beginning. Because the thing about removing a support beam is that the whole structure doesn't collapse right away. It creaks. It shifts. It adjusts just enough to give you hope it might hold. Until one day, with no warning, it comes crashing down. The third call came before dawn on December 26th. That strange dead zone morning when the glitter of wrapping paper and the hum of artificial joy have already faded. But the mess, the emotional mess, the receipts, the regrets, still lingers in the corners of every room. It was still dark when my phone lit up on the nightstand, the screen glowing with Kevin's number for the third time in less than 48 hours. And this time, for reasons I still don't fully understand, I answered. Not because I missed them, not because I had softened, but because some part of me wanted to hear how far things had crumbled. To confirm that pulling away wasn't just symbolic, but seismic. What I didn't expect, what I wasn't ready for, was the sound of Lisa's voice. Raw, cracking, breathless, like she'd been crying for hours. Or maybe just hadn't slept at all. Her words came fast, tripping over each other, almost unintelligible at first. A barrage of panic and half-sentences and accusations thinly veiled as pleas. Kevin, she said, had gotten into something. Cryptocurrency or day trading or some online scheme promising fast returns. And now their savings were gone. Not just gone in a temporary down this month, up next month kind of way, but vanished, like smoke, like water down a storm drain. The mortgage payment had bounced. The credit cards were overdrawn. The fridge was half empty, and she hadn't told the kids yet that there wouldn't be groceries next week. I said nothing at first. I let her talk. I listened to the unraveling of the woman who had just a week ago declared I was too much to be around. And as she spoke, somewhere between her gasps and sniffling and that dramatic gulping sound people make when they think they're about to faint from the weight of their own reality, she said something that made me sit up in bed, spine straight, fingers tightening around the phone like it had suddenly become a live wire. "I think this might be your fault," she whispered. And in that moment, I felt something cold crawl across my skin. Because for Lisa, accountability had always been a moving target. She had a way of framing events so that, no matter how distant the link, no matter how irrational the logic, it always looped back to someone else's failure to save her. She said, "You stopped helping, and that's when everything went to hell." As if my absence created a vacuum the universe rushed to fill with bad luck. And I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was terrifying to witness the mental gymnastics of someone who truly believed their support system wasn't a blessing but a requirement. A subscription they had never paid for, but expected to renew indefinitely. I asked her, gently but clearly, if she had told our parents. She had. And of course, they had taken her side. My mother had called earlier that morning, left a voicemail dripping with guilt and disappointment, saying that family means showing up when things are hard, not turning your back when people make mistakes. She hadn't asked for my side of the story. She hadn't asked what pushed me to pull away. She had simply assumed that Lisa's disaster was my failure to continue absorbing the impact. And maybe that's what really broke me. Not the betrayal itself, not the manipulation or the lies or even the cutting group text that started it all, but the realization that the people I had spent my entire life protecting, defending, serving, didn't just fail to protect me in return. They never even saw me as someone who might need protecting. In their eyes, I had always been the fixer, the one who didn't bleed, the one who never broke. So I asked Lisa a question. Just one quiet, pointed question that sliced through her sobbing like a blade. "What would you have done if I had died last year in that car accident?" It wasn't hypothetical, not really. The accident had been real. A black ice patch, a skid, a crash into a guardrail that left me bruised and dazed, but miraculously alive. She hadn't even come to the hospital, claimed the kids were sick, or Kevin was working late. I can't even remember the excuse anymore. But I remember lying in that bed, IV in my arm, scrolling through texts, and finding nothing from her but a thumbs up emoji after I'd told her I was okay. She didn't answer my question now, not directly. She just kept crying, the kind of crying that's equal parts panic and shame. And then, after a long silence, she said something that struck deeper than I expected. I think he's going to leave. At first, I thought she meant Kevin might walk out on her. Now that the money was gone, the illusion of stability shattered. But then she said, "He's already packed a bag. He says he's tired of carrying me. He said, maybe my sister was right to walk away." That hit different. Because maybe he was right. Maybe I was right. Maybe for the first time in my life, I had drawn a boundary so firm that it forced someone else to take a hard look at their reflection. Or maybe, and here's where the doubt started creeping back in, maybe I had become exactly what they said: cold, unyielding, the villain in a family drama where forgiveness was supposed to be automatic, not earned. She begged me to reconsider. Just 1 month of help, just enough to get through January, a few $100s, a loan, a gift, anything. But I didn't answer. I told her I'd think about it. I hung up. And for the next several hours, I walked around my apartment in silence, trying to decide if saying no again would make me heartless or finally free. But I already knew the answer. The part that shook me wasn't that Lisa had fallen apart. It was that she had only noticed the safety net was gone once she hit the ground. There's a peculiar thing that happens when silence stretches for more than a few days. Not the kind of silence that comes from absence or distraction, but the kind that emerges from a conscious decision to disengage. A silence that carries weight, that hovers like smoke in a room with no windows. It creates space, uncomfortable at first, then oddly clarifying, and in that space, thoughts start to sharpen. Memories rise like sediment stirred from the bottom of a glass, and things that once seemed benign or brushed aside suddenly stand out with unsettling clarity. That's what happened to me in the days after Lisa's phone call, the one where her panic bled through every word, where she cried and begged and all but accused me of being the reason her world was collapsing. I had hung up with a mix of numbness and adrenaline, but in the quiet that followed, something colder took over. Curiosity, not the gentle kind, the invasive kind. I opened old text threads, not out of nostalgia, but because something inside me, something raw and resentful, needed to remember the exact shape of her manipulation, needed proof that the kindness I had extended for years hadn't just been unappreciated, but weaponized against me in ways I hadn't noticed while I was too busy being the reliable one. I started scrolling, fingers trembling, not from fear, but from a brewing anger I hadn't fully let myself feel until then. Message after message unfolded like chapters in a novel I had apparently been too blind to realize. I was starring in, a supporting character in her story, who was only relevant when she needed a lifeline. There were requests disguised as jokes, guilt trips buried under faux gratitude, and repeated patterns of urgency. Can you just this once? Or, I hate to ask, but, or the classic, I don't know who else to turn to. Phrases that, on their own, might seem innocuous, but in accumulation painted a picture that felt less like family and more like emotional extortion. And I saw something else too, the pattern of omission, the way she would only tell me the version of the story that made her look helpless but innocent, the kind of victim who had done nothing wrong but simply suffered the cruel randomness of life, when in truth, she had often created her own messes with carelessness and poor judgment and an unshakable belief that someone else, usually me, would clean them up. That night, I did something I probably shouldn't have, something that most people would call petty or invasive, but something that, in my mind, felt justified. I checked the shared cloud storage folder we'd set up years ago for family photos and holiday planning, one I had completely forgotten about. I wasn't looking for dirt. At least, that's what I told myself. But somewhere deep inside, I think I was searching for the confirmation that my worst suspicions weren't paranoia, but pattern recognition. What I found there made my stomach twist. Screenshots, messages, photos, not of me, but about me. A thread between Lisa and our mother, dating back several months, maybe longer, where I had been the topic of conversation. Dissected like some distant aunt or coworker they barely tolerated. There was a screenshot of one of my texts, me offering to drop off groceries during a snowstorm, and a comment from Lisa that read, "She just loves playing the martyr, doesn't she?" Another one where I had shared a work accomplishment was met with our mom's reply. She always has to make everything about her. The same mother who had called me the day before to remind me what family meant had apparently been comfortable reducing my efforts, my successes, my entire personality to a running punchline in a private group chat. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that screen, reading and rereading those lines like they might shift into something kinder if I blinked enough. But they didn't. They stayed exactly as they were, cold, dismissive, and proof that whatever role I thought I held in this family was not only unappreciated, it was resented. They didn't just tolerate me, they mocked me, privately, intimately, repeatedly. The betrayal was deeper than the Christmas uninvitation or the financial ingratitude. It was the slow drip realization that my presence, my support, my very identity had been subject to their quiet ridicule for years. That I had been investing time, money, and emotional labor into people who viewed me not as a loved one, but as a tool, useful but annoying, necessary but irritating, beneficial but excessive. And then, like a splinter breaking through the skin after years of being embedded, a final damning message surfaced. "She'll always pay," Lisa had written. "She needs us more than we need her." That was the line, the one that changed everything. Because up until then, some fragile, hopeful part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong to pull away. That maybe Lisa's spiral was a consequence of bad luck and not bad faith. But that line, that was intent, that was calculation. That was her admitting, even bragging, that she had always seen me as someone to use, someone whose guilt was her currency, someone who could be manipulated simply by playing the family card. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything, I didn't even cry. I sat still, spine straight, hands folded, and I felt something settle in me, not rage, not pain, but certainty. Certainty that I was done, truly, finally done. Not just with Lisa, but with all of them. Because it wasn't just her betrayal. It was the quiet complicity of everyone else. The way my mother had joined in the ridicule. The way my father, passive as always, had said nothing. The way even our other siblings had remained silent when I stopped showing up. As if they'd known all along that I was never really part of the circle, just someone orbiting around it. Occasionally useful, but always outside the line. I composed a message that night, not impulsive, not emotional, but precise. I wrote to my parents, to Lisa, to the family group thread we had used for years. The subject line was short. No more. The body of the message was clear. I listed what I had seen, what I had felt, and what I now understood. I told them I would no longer be available for emotional, financial, or logistical support. I told them I didn't wish them harm, but I no longer felt safe offering help to people who saw me as a joke when I wasn't in the room. I ended the message with a simple request. Do not contact me again unless it's to apologize without justification. I hit send, I closed my laptop, and for the first time in my adult life, I slept like a stone at the bottom of a still pond, silent, cold, and finally undisturbed. The morning began the same way most mornings had, since I severed ties with Lisa and my parents, with quiet. Not peace exactly, because peace implies resolution, and nothing about the last few weeks had resolved anything. But there was a stillness in the quiet that was new to me, a kind of detachment that felt like stepping into someone else's life, like I'd walked out of a burning building and left the screams behind me. The email I had sent, direct, unflinching, a scalpel rather than a hammer, had not been answered. Not by my mother, not by Lisa, not by any of the people who had been so quick to define me as too much when I was the one holding everything together. There were no rebuttals, no phone calls, no sudden declarations of guilt or shame, just silence. And that silence, while validating in some dark way, also felt like confirmation that they had never really seen me as family to begin with, only as a function. I thought that was the end. I truly did. I thought I had reached the final page of the story, that I had made my point, drawn my line, shut the door, and locked it so firmly that nothing could reach me from the other side. But as it turns out, the thing about endings is that they rarely arrive clean. They arrive messy, dripping with the consequences of every choice you thought wouldn't echo, every line you thought wouldn't be crossed. It was a Tuesday when the doorbell rang. A slow, hesitant ring that felt too unsure to be a delivery driver and too awkward to be a neighbor. I hadn't been expecting anyone, hadn't had plans, hadn't even spoken out loud yet that day. When I opened the door, the breath left my body in a way that felt like being punched. There on my porch stood Lisa. She looked nothing like the polished, composed woman I had been trained to tolerate all these years. Her makeup was smudged, eyes swollen from crying, and her coat was mismatched with her shoes, like she'd grabbed the first thing she could find without thinking. And in her arms, clutching her tightly, half buried in her coat, was her youngest child, Ella, cheeks flushed red from the cold, one sock missing, hair unbrushed. For a moment we just stared at each other, the weight of everything unspoken stretching between us like a rope I could cut with a single word. And then Lisa broke first. "He left," she said, her voice cracking on the second syllable. "Kevin's gone. He took everything we had left, and I don't even have the gas to drive back home." I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. I didn't reach for Ella or gesture toward the couch or offer the comfort that, once upon a time, would have come before I even knew what was happening. Instead, I stood still, rooted in the doorway like it might protect me from getting pulled back into the undertow. Lisa kept talking, each word sounding more frantic, more broken, like she had rehearsed this apology in her mind. But now couldn't find the rhythm. She said she was sorry, that she didn't mean what she said, that she was overwhelmed, that she thought I would always be there, no matter what, and that she never realized how much she had relied on me until everything else fell apart. And then, like a desperate punchline, she asked if she could come in, just for a night, just until she figured out what to do next, just until she made a plan. But here's the thing about desperation. It doesn't erase betrayal. It might explain it, contextualize it, even soften its edges, but it doesn't undo it. And as she stood there, looking at me not like a sister, but like a lifeline, I felt the most complicated emotion I've ever experienced in my life. Not anger, not pity, not vindication, but emptiness. I had spent so many years brimming with emotion for this woman, for this family, for the roles I thought I had to play. And now, standing face to face with their consequences, I felt nothing but the absence of it all. Behind her eyes, I saw not just the chaos of her current life, but the echo of every time she had lied, minimized, laughed at my pain, exploited my loyalty. I saw the threads she had pulled one by one until the entire fabric of our relationship had unraveled. And now she stood there trying to patch it all back together with borrowed apologies and a crying child. I looked at Ella, and for a moment, something inside me cracked. Not because I believed Lisa deserved another chance, but because the child didn't ask for this. The child didn't manipulate anyone. The child hadn't laughed behind my back or weaponized kindness. The child was just cold, confused, small. And so I stepped aside, just enough to let them in, just enough to provide warmth, food, a night's rest. I told Lisa she could sleep on the couch, one night, that was all. And tomorrow she'd need a plan. She nodded, eyes wide, grateful, maybe even stunned that I hadn't slammed the door in her face. But I didn't smile, I didn't hug her, I didn't say I forgave her, because I didn't, not yet, maybe not ever. As she tucked Ella into the makeshift bedding on the couch, I stood in the kitchen, watching her from a distance, and I realized that this awkward, uneasy silence between us was the truest we had ever been. Not performing, not pretending, just standing in the aftermath of the damage we both created, trying to figure out if there was anything worth salvaging. And maybe that's where it ends. Not with reconciliation, not with revenge, but with a fragile, uneasy truce born out of necessity and exhaustion. A single night of shared shelter under a roof built not from love, but from boundaries. Tomorrow she might leave, or stay, or spiral again. I don't know. And for once, I don't need to. Because this time, the choice isn't hers, it's mine. And I've never been clearer.